So my name is Trudy Juriansz. I'm calling at the moment from Brisbane in Australia. And I work at the moment within GENOA, which is the Global Ecovillage Network for Oceania and Asia. And on two projects, one in Sri Lanka with the women in the north and the northeast of the country that were affected by the war. And then the other community that we've been working with and the network with is in Fiji. So the COVID has actually, in a country like Sri Lanka that is constantly hit by a crisis, even yesterday marking 1 year after the Easter bombings, the country is again in lockdown or in curfew, what we call it in Sri Lanka. And the communities, it's the people that are living day to day that are really struggling, the people that are trying to make ends meet, the fishermen, the farmers trying to get their products out there, that are really struggling from COVID because there is a complete lockdown. The curfew is only lifted on certain days of the week and at certain times of the day. So it's just mass movements of people outside their homes, which kind of, it deters the point of actually keeping people safe and in isolation. So there's all of this kind of happening at the moment. The communities in the north it's already a very militarized area after the war, and it's continuing to be like that in these communities. And again, communities are struggling to make ends meet, to find access to get their goods and services sold, to be able to access even food, and in certain communities, especially in the communities in the plantation sector in the middle part of the country. And in those communities, the people are, the plantation workers are still being asked by the tea companies to work as they consider tea an essential product. So this is also, just crazy to think of these workers and what they're going through at the moment. In Fiji, COVID, a lot of the governments have started like a contingency plan to evacuate people back to their home islands. So that's one thing that has happened in the Solomon Islands last week. So in the Pacific in general, there was a big Cyclone Harold, that hit the Pacific. And in one of the islands, in the Solomon Islands, the government tried to evacuate people back to their home islands. One of the ferries was overloaded with people, and the ferry sank as it hit the conditions out at sea. The pilot community that we're working with in Fiji is underwater because it's on the mainland, and that was the first part of the Pacific that got hit by the cyclone. So now you've seen photos of the village just being underwater, and people just like, it's hard to move, it's hard to get access to good food, and also to get clean water because the land is also now completely salinated. So we're just seeing like multiple things happening, to these communities, and it's quite. It's a very challenging time for people at the moment. Yeah,
it sounds heartbreaking. And I heard also in our last conversation you say that some of the children from this village were actually on the boat.
There was three kids on the boat, on the ferry that sank from the Solomon Islands, from the village that we've been working with over there. So that was also quite heartbreaking, very tragic.
Yeah, so these are some of the places where we're already seeing how climate change and COVID-19, how everything starts impacting on top of each other, and wars, as in Sri Lanka. So, when we here in Europe are, in a state of crisis, this is so much more existential. So how are people responding, and is there anything from the eco-village structures or community building that is supporting people to be more resilient in the face of these terrible trials?
Yeah, I mean, what we're really seeing also, like on the ground, are people are coming together. People are, we're seeing so many acts of generosity, people sharing food, and temples, in Sri Lanka that are giving out dane, like giving food to people, which is something that a lot of the temples, they do, and a lot of the religious places as well. We're seeing organizations, big organizations like Sarvodaya, which is a network of villages that are part of the GEN network, really stepping up and going to the front line and supporting people on the edge and working with people and giving out supplies and giving out food. So Sarvodaya do have a disaster resilience unit where whenever there's a crisis in Sri Lanka, immediately that unit becomes active, and then they start to do the work on the ground in communities. So that's pretty amazing to see that happen. And in Fiji, people also, they have that tendency, that community spirit that binds them, that where there are constantly spaces of support, where they're constantly helping each other. So this just naturally happens. I think this is also an element of the human spirit that we just see naturally come out when there is a disaster or there is a crisis. And a lot of the work we've done with these communities, which is looking at the communities of the women that we work with in the north of Sri Lanka and even in Fiji. We've been doing workshops with them on eco-village design, looking at the areas of regeneration. And a lot of them, the things that we've been working with them through and the plans that they've been working on, we're seeing parts of it actually being used during this time as well. With the women, of course, they have the women that were affected by the war, they've got access to some resources that the government has given them, land. And one of the things that we've been doing with them is to support them to understand the areas of regeneration in eco-village design, but then to also do hands-on work, hands-on training in terms of composting, garden design, building raised beds. And the women, most of them have been affected. Most of them have got trauma. They're still carrying trauma, but they're disabled in some way, physically disabled, but it doesn't stop them. They've such amazing spirit, and they're just taken all of these things and just multiplied it, and working so fast and just so motivated and inspired just by simple solutions, and how they can really multiply it and how they can really scale up. So we're seeing the women really take on a lot of these things, and they're doing it. And in Fiji, the pilot community, they're also really, we work with them to understand the low-hanging fruits, what are the things that they can do easily. And they're really taking it, and they're really implementing a lot of these things. Another really interesting community in Fiji that is already they're not calling themselves an eco-village, but it's a model town that is the model that they use is very close to eco-village design. And they've got cyclone-proof houses. So in the cyclone that happened in Fiji a few years ago, none of the houses were actually damaged by the cyclone. So we're seeing also examples of what's possible. If we take these solutions and we apply it to the local context, and how when we create partnerships, and this is what we're doing in Fiji as well, with local organizations that are doing similar work, where we can align our values and the systems that we use, where we can really also look at how we can scale up. So this is another thing that we're really seeing that we're able to do.
Beautiful. Is there any last message you would like to send to our global networks of communities and community builders at this time?
Yeah. I think this is a very challenging time for all of us, but it's also a time of great opportunity, and a time where we can really use the skills that we have, the knowledge that we have intrinsically, and how we can really come together as communities, as individuals, and how when we actually form together, we do collective action, what that can ripple out, and that's huge. And so I really would love to encourage everybody to really, to use this time, to use the privilege. So many of us actually do live in privilege, and how do we actually use our privilege to do the right things in the world right now, and to do what the world really needs right now, and what our communities need. So yeah, thank you.